Quiz. Who first wore high heels? Queer men who wanted to walk like women. Girls who needed to look like women. Men who wanted to look strong and masculine. Women who were constricted by long dresses. Or very expensive Wagyu beef cows to keep their precious little hooves out of the mud.
Maybe. Could be men.
Yes! It was men who first wore high heels as a statement of their strength and masculinity. I don't really know anything about cows.
Why don't they anymore? The bigger question is why the patriarchy didn't cling onto heels like they do with all the good things.
Hello lovely people, this video is sponsored by Surfshark, more on them later. Welcome to my channel where I make videos about disability, chronic illness and LGBTQ+ culture, history and activism. I'm Jessica, my pronouns are she, her, and if you haven't picked up yet on the gay vibes, yes, I am a lesbian.
Oh wait, I already knew that.
Now I sit very much towards the high femme end of the butch femme spectrum. I film most of myself in skirts and dresses, and I love vintage fashion. If we're talking shoe lesbian identities, which is a thing, I'm definitely a heels lesbian. And speaking of shoes, drumroll please, my American Duchess collection is now in stock. Oh yes. Those of you who ordered these beauties in the pre-order, they are currently on their way to you. Absolutely tag me in your photos when you get them. I would love to see how you are styling both the Jessie heels and the clawed flats.
Both with quick release buckles for accessibility and time saving.
Designing these shoes with a vintage style brand used traditional methods and high-end materials, but think about modern comfort was one of the highlights of my last 2 years. The craftsmanship is just incredible. They are available now while stocks last on the American Duchess website. I will leave the link below. Don't worry about the name, they do ship outside of the USA. And for one lucky person, I have even more exciting news as I am currently holding a giveaway on Instagram. You'll be winning a pair of your choice, Jessie's or Claude's. They don't have to be the heels, despite the title of this video. And all you have to do is be subscribed to me here on YouTube, follow both American Duchess and I on Instagram, and then find this post, tag your friends in the comments of that post to be entered. Each tag comment counts as one entry and you can enter as many times as you like. Good luck and may the best Duchess win. Although today high heels are associated with femininity, they weren't always. In fact, if we go back thousands of years, they have entirely practical origins and are associated with military prowess and masculinity. For this video, I wanted to dive into the history of high heels and explore how they came to be associated with such rigid gender roles, while people of all genders should be able to wear heels if they want.
Well, today the cis-heteropatriarchal society that we live in views them as incompatible with masculinity. Apart from cowboys, cowboy boots have heels, yet cowboys are still icons of macho masculinity.
We're going to talk more about that later. Heads up, history and high heels are political. In my video about the history of bras and why there are so many tiny bows in our underwear, I got a few comments about how people were expecting me just to talk about the history of underwear and not bring feminism or political ideology into it.
But history is innately political.
Well, exactly. I have a whole playlist of videos on my channel talking about queer, disabled, feminist figures throughout history. It's important to me to highlight the kind of people who are erased or overlooked. We can't talk about the history of high heels and how they went from being seen as a statement of masculinity to the epitome of femininity without discussing gender roles, feminism and politics.
And let's be honest, exploring whether it's just cis men's fragile masculinity that means they don't wear high heels today.
Hey, that's pretty broad. Some people who identify as men do wear heels, and not all people who regularly wear heels identify as women. But speaking of fragile things, how often do you think about your online safety while shopping or streaming? The internet can be a bit risky, even in so-called safe areas. But fear not, friends, Surfshark is today's video sponsor, and they're here to save the day. Welcome to the outbreak. I know, did you enjoy my not so fragile segue? Surfshark makes online browsing safer with their Easily Connect feature, allowing you to change your virtual location with just a click. This means access to sites, services and content you wouldn't usually see. Plus, one of my absolute favourite features, you can use Surfshark across an unlimited number of devices. I love knowing my entire family is protected, whether we're shopping, streaming or just scrolling. No ads, no trackers, no malware or phishing, just peace of mind. Go to surfshark.com/Jessica for 4 extra months of Surfshark for free. That's surfshark.com/Jessica, or scan the QR code on screen right here. How handy, especially if you're watching me on your television in your living room. Hello to people who do that. Now let's go back to ancient Egypt. They really don't have to worry about online security, you know. Early heels in ancient Egypt. No one knows the exact origins of high heels, but some of the earliest records of heels, or at least precursors of the heel, can be found in ancient Egypt. We found depictions and even ancient shoes from around 3500 BCE, showing people wearing elevated shoes for ceremonial purposes. Now, these wouldn't have been high heels as we usually think about them, but more like sandals with an incredibly thick sole, raising the wearer up. Think platform shoes, Spice Girls, maybe with a slight wedge, lifting the heel taller than the toes and ball of the foot. And ancient Egyptian footwear can be really quite elaborate. Egyptologist Salima Ikram says that with some of Tutankhamun's shoes, they used bits of gold, birch bark, bone, and maybe even glass inlays to decorate and create luxurious and glamorous footwear.
There's also a theory that butchers in ancient Egypt wore heels for more practical purposes, to keep their clothes and feet off the floor so they didn't trail in blood.
Yes. I will note that I wasn't able to find any information about how we know this. Please leave a comment if you or someone you know is an ancient Egyptian butcher and can verify this. Thank you. Similar platform-type sandals were worn by the ancient Greeks, Etruscans and Romans as well. In ancient Greece, these kothorni, or buskin, were worn by actors with the different heights of the raised sandals used to show the different social status of the characters. The soles of these early heels would usually be made of wood or cork, and the higher the heel, the more important the character.
Interestingly, a Cinderella-type slipper test story can be traced back to 1st century Egypt. In a Teen Vogue article, Ariana Marsh notes that in this version, and in similar stories that exist across Europe, Africa and indigenous cultures in North and South America, the protagonist's iconic slippers are always splendid and represent the importance, power and magic of shoes.
Oh, I definitely think heels are magic. That's why I struggle to walk in them. Platforms to protect your shoes. But wait, there's a second proto-heel we need to discuss before we can get to the most direct ancestor of the high heels we have today. Chopines were pedestal-like shoes worn in the late 15th century through to the early 17th century.
Now, chopines weren't necessarily shoes as we might think of them. They were instead little pedestals, raised platforms protecting the wearer's actual shoe from the mud and muck of the street.
As Marsh puts it in Teen Vogue, they transformed the upper-class European woman into a towering figure. Chopines were almost completely hidden under the wearer's skirts, which were also lifted out of the mud very conveniently.
However, the higher the chopines, the more fabric that would be needed for the dress, which in itself is a marker of status. You can see how this easily became a never-ending cycle, with the shoes getting higher and higher and the skirts getting longer and longer.
Chopines were especially popular in Venice, where they reportedly reached 54 centimetres in height, and maids were required to act as a cane to help the noble ladies keep their balance. What a great job. I'm focusing on the European precursors to today's high heels in this video, but there were utility-driven raised shoes and sandals in other countries and cultures as well, like the geta in Japan. One of the earliest reports of a woman wearing a shoe similar to the modern heel, that is with the toes and ball of the foot lower than the heel, is Catherine de' Medici in 1533. She was 4 foot 9 inches tall and wanted to look taller and more powerful when she got married to the Duke d'Orléans.
She was also 14, so you know, child-sized.
However, knowing how unstable chopines could be, she asked for her shoes to be adapted so she wasn't scared of falling on her face on her wedding day.
Hot tip, absolutely wear your wedding shoes for a number of hours around the house before the big day. Really wear them in, so you're not dealing with new shoe blisters at your actual wedding. Are you giving advice to child brides now? Well, I'm giving advice to adult brides, and you are being obtuse.
There isn't a consensus on exactly what her wedding shoes looked like. Some reports say that her shoes were just chopines altered so the front part of the foot was much lower than the heel, while others say the design incorporated a separate heel, like the Persian-style riding boots that were gaining prominence among aristocratic men in Europe at the time. Heels on horseback in Persia. Now, if you have ever struggled to walk across uneven or muddy ground in heels and wondered who on earth thought this was a practical shoe for walking or a wedding in a field, I have the answer. No one did. The earliest people who wore the most similar looking heels to the one we wear today didn't wear them for walking, but for riding. Elizabeth Semmelhack, the curator of the Bata Shoe Museum and the author of Heights of Fashion, A History of the Elevated Shoe, explains that we can trace the heels we wear today to 9th century Persia. There's artwork showing men wearing heeled boots while on horseback. These heels made it easier for soldiers to stand in the saddle and to shoot bows and arrows or throw spears.
Think about the half-circle shape of a stirrup. It makes sense that a heel would give you that level of stability whilst on horseback.
Fashion historian Maud Bass-Kruger explains that by the 17th century, 1-inch heels were the norm for Persian riders on and off their horses. Since owning horses was a symbol of wealth, heeled shoes came to signify money and power. By the end of the 16th century, Persia had the largest cavalry in the world under Shah Abbas I. Keen to forge links with rulers in Europe, he sent diplomatic missions to Russia, Germany and Spain.
In an article for the BBC, journalist William Kramer wrote, "A wave of interest in all things Persian passed through Western Europe. Persian-style shoes were enthusiastically adopted by aristocrats who sought to give their appearance a virile, masculine edge that it suddenly seemed only heeled shoes could supply." European aristocrats wearing heels to appear grander and more powerful because of its association with Persian military prowess is very different to how high heels are perceived today.
High fashion in the French court. In the 17th century, Paris was the fashion capital of Europe. Bass-Kruger explains that the 17th century male fashion was all about emphasizing the legs. High heels, tight coloured stockings, and loose uncollected breeches all helped to emphasize men's shapely calves and thighs. As others began to follow in the footsteps of the aristocracy and wear heels, they responded by increasing the height of their heels. And like the towering chopines, these higher heels were decidedly impractical. Semmelhack explains that this was the point. One of the best ways that status can be conveyed is through impracticality.
The more uncomfortable, the more decadent, the less useful clothing was, the more it signalled the high status of the wearer, that they didn't need to work. I actually dress like this to take my toddler to the playground, so...
Louis XIV of France, who reigned between 1643 and 1715, was a big fan of heels. A Carrie Bradshaw storing shoes in the oven level fan of heels. Not that Louis XIV was storing his elegant heels in the oven. I don't think he knew what an oven was.
Semmelhack says that Louis XIV actually set the fashion for expressing political privilege, refined dress, including the wearing of elegant high-heeled shoes covered in red leather. He also ruled that only members of his court were allowed to wear red heels, and he would revoke the privilege for those who fell out of his favour.
The luxury and exclusivity of Louis XIV's red heels is mirrored in today's iconic red-soled Christian Louboutin heels.
Which is somewhat ironic, given that the designer has called the idea of men in heels ridiculous, but let's talk about that later.
Even the overshoes, worn to make walking in heels more practical, became a status symbol. Talking about The Shoemaker by Abraham Boss, Semmelhack says, "In this print, a mannish woman is being fitted for a type of manly shoes called slap soles. Heels were impractical off the horse and sank in the mud. To correct this, some men wore their heeled footwear slipped inside separate overshoes that looked like flat-soled mules. Others wore shoes with extended flat-sole pieces."
The distinctive flapping sound that these extended soles made signified their wearer's high status, and as the Shoemaker print demonstrates, women wanted the power and high status that heels signalled in men. Well, duh.
The heel evolves, practical or a symbol of power. So, I live a very queer life. I'm married to a woman. We're raising a child in a city that brands itself the gay capital of the UK. And I'm very interested in fashion. I know a lot of queer people. I don't know. I like history. To me, the idea that high heels are only for one gender of person is a little at odds with my daily life. But I'm aware that isn't the case for everyone in 2024. Many people see the idea of men in heels as absurd. But in the 1600s, it was women in heels who were ridiculed.
Semmelhack explains, in the 1630s, you had women cutting their hair, adding epaulets to their outfits. They would smoke pipes. They would wear hats that were very masculine. And this is why women adopted the heel. It was in an effort to masculinize their outfits. Ah, it's going well. Feminarchy is just around the corner.
However, by the end of the century, the heels men wore fell into two distinct categories and expressed two kinds of masculinity. While leather-covered heels signified refinement, stacked leather heels signalled action and were commonly found on men's riding boots. Semmelhack explains that this boot, for example, donates a high-stacked leather heel and was clearly designed to be worn in harsh riding conditions. The use of hard, thick jack leather provided a great deal of protection, while the stacked leather heel would have been of use to the rider keeping his foot in the stirrup. Throughout the 18th century, heels became increasingly gendered. Heels designed for men were broad and sturdy, with the heel solidly in the centre of the heel of the foot. Heels designed for women, in contrast, were usually leather-covered and very narrow, tapering to a point. The shoes themselves were also pointed, so women's feet looked dainty when the tips appeared from under their skirts. Kruger points to this painting by William Hogarth in 1730 as showing the difference between women's and men's shoes. Although the younger male leather shoes still boast a small heel, it's already lower than the woman's, and the shoe broader and sturdier and less delicate. Additionally, the actual heel on women's shoes moved backwards towards the very back of the shoe.
Did this mean that heels designed for women were and are less practical and comfortable than heels that were designed for men? Oh yes!
One of the things that I loved about my Jessie high heels in the shoe collection with American Duchess is they use this more old-fashioned style of high heel, where the heel is in the middle of the heel of your foot rather than right at the back of the shoe, and it provides more comfort and stability, and it makes my feet hurt less. Fashion is so frivolous and feminine. In 1666, King Charles II embraced another Persian-inspired fashion statement, the three-piece suit. Men's fashion became simpler, more restrained, and that trend continued. Semmelhack explains that the term red heels came to be used mockingly, and fops, men overly interested in fashion, including heels, became the focus of cultural critics.
A fop, you say? A feminine-coded man interested in fashion? I think I see where this is going.
In the 18th century, the Enlightenment period saw men in Europe shift from using religion to justify their misogyny, racism, ableism and homophobia to using science to find reasons to continue to hold their existing beliefs and bigotries.
Okay, that might not be strictly how historians define it.
There was an increasing acceptance of the idea,
Though, let me be clear, the incorrect idea.
that all men, even working-class men, were capable of rational thought and were uniquely deserving of being allowed to vote. Women, however, were believed to not be capable of rational thought and thus not worthy of the same rights as men. Kramer writes that this was what would later be called the Great Male Renunciation, which would see men abandon the wearing of jewellery, bright colours and ostentatious fabrics in favour of a dark, more sober and homogeneous look. Men's clothing no longer operated so clearly as a signifier of social class, but while these boundaries were being blurred, the differences between the sexes became more pronounced. Heels, and fashion as a whole, came to be seen as frivolous and feminine, and a sign that women weren't deserving of those rights. Being interviewed by Rasheen Lanigan for an article in The Tile, Semmelhack said women were seen as emotional, sentimental, and uneducatable. Female desirability begins to be constructed in terms of irrational fashion, and the high heel, once separated from its original function of horseback riding, becomes a primary example of impractical dress. Kruger notes that most men stopped wearing heels around 1730, 100 years after women started wearing heels, as a reaction against their perceived feminization.
However, the stacked heel lived on as a symbol of rugged masculinity, like in cowboy boots.
Cowboy boots have heels. Like many aspects of history, cowboys on the western frontier in the USA and Canada in the 19th century were much less white than media might have us believe. Cowboys were made up of new immigrants from Europe, Indigenous Americans, and black men and recently freed enslaved people. However, as Semmelhack puts it, they were united in their vigorous manliness. By the middle of the 19th century, heels had all but vanished from men's fashion. The exception to this is when, like with the original Persian riding boot, the heels were purely practical. Cowboy boots needed to be hard-wearing, and whilst early photographs show them wearing a wide range of styles, many of the boots featured heels. Semmelhack says, from dime novels to Wild West shows to Hollywood westerns, the cowboys symbolised unfettered freedoms and self-reliance in the 20th century. Although 19th century cowboys first splurged on ostentatious boots after reaching the railheads at the end of a long cattle drive, it took Hollywood for cowboy boots with its pointy toe and low-strung heel to finally take shape.
Yeah, it's easy to romanticize the frontier spirit that many cowboy films and TV shows depict, but this is the history of colonization and genocide of Indigenous Americans, So,
Although they haven't endured as an iconic symbol of cowboy bravado in the same way, packer boots like this originated on the western frontier and were also worn by cowboys. Semmelhack explains that they evolved from the 19th century lace-up boots and allow wearers to customize the fit. Like other cowboy boots, packer boots feature high heels and are commonly embellished with embroidery.
cowboys can wear heels without relinquishing any of their macho swagger. So why can't men today do the same?
It's a fascinating dichotomy, really illustrating how ridiculous our gendered rules about who is allowed to wear what shoes or what clothes really are, as are our gendered rules about everything else, to be honest. Stilettos and suffering for beauty. Whilst women's heels had also fallen out of fashion to a degree after the French Revolution, they had a resurgence in the mid-20th century. And similar to the Persian riding boots, the high heels that sparked this revival weren't necessarily designed to be walked in. Kellgren wrote that photography was transforming the way that fashions and a female self-image were constructed. Models were photographed for pin-up shoots and sometimes dirty postcards, where they were instructed to adopt poses that resembled classical nudes whilst wearing modern high heels. But they weren't necessarily supposed to be walked in. It didn't matter that they weren't practical or comfortable, it was all about that snippet of image that they were creating. And Semmelhack believes the idea of high heels as an erotica adornment for women.
Did you know that in L. Frank Baum's novel, The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy's shoes were originally silver? Yeah. They were changed to that iconic red to make the most of the relatively new process of filming in Technicolor when the film was made in 1939.
The thin heel that differentiated women's heels from men's since the 18th century reached its peak in the stiletto, named after an Italian knife famous for its slender blade and needle-sharp point. In an article for Vogue, written with journalist Alice Carey, Baz Kruger explains there are 3 designers credited with inventing the stiletto: Salvatore Ferragamo, Roger Vivier, and André Perugin. Her article explains that the stiletto was engineered in the 1950s, when new materials and techniques invented that aircraft carriers were applied to shoe construction. The use of aluminium and injection molding to fuse metal and plastic made it possible to elongate and raise heels to new levels. The stiletto's iconic status was assured through their association with Marilyn Monroe, who reportedly owned dozens of pairs of Salvatore Ferragamo-designed heels.
Oh, I will never be able to walk in those. Pencil-thin heels are not for me.
High heels were a symbol of elegance, sophistication, femininity, even Hollywood glamour, but not necessarily one of comfort. A profile of French footwear designer Christian Louboutin in The New Yorker reported that he said, "Ugh, I hate the whole concept of comfort," which I think I would find a little less annoying statement if you wore the heels he designed. Also, you should be able to be comfortable and wear heels. Even as high heels were becoming more synonymous with femininity, there were still men rocking heels. Baz Kruger points to how the Beatles helped popularise the Cuban heel, which is an angled, rounded heel, in the 1960s and 70s. Beatle boots were a variant of the Chelsea boot, tight-fitting, ankle-high boots with a sharp, pointed toe and Cuban heels.
There were also gay and bisexual men like Freddie Mercury who wore heels and pushed the boundaries of the gender binary.
Interestingly, Semmelhack describes men wearing heels in the second half of the 20th century, not as a way of challenging masculinity, but rather as a means of proclaiming it. I personally love the idea of heels being a form of expressing both femininity and masculinity. Do you think we have to break down the gender binary to get to that point? Or can heels just be for everyone? Sexist social expectations. Did you know that before 2018, all of the women's shoes emojis had heels? It wasn't until Unicode 11.0 that we got the ballet pump flat shoe emoji.
The emoji looks like the Claude shoe.
Obviously, I don't agree with the idea that shoes, let alone shoe emojis, should be gendered, but the fact that prior to 2018, all the shoe emojis coded as being for women, the red high heel, the tall women's boot, the heeled women's sandal. It really hammers home the gender binary. It also speaks to the gendered pressure of what shoes women should be wearing. Like makeup, heels have become part of the social expectations on how women perform their femininity, how we're expected to present in professional and even social settings, rather than a choice we get to make about how we feel most comfortable, most confident, rather than wearing heels because they're how we want to creatively express ourselves through the style, rather than because they're an obligation. Women are both shamed for not conforming to these beauty standards and also criticised for upholding patriarchal values if we do enjoy more traditional femininity. Can't win, can't win.
Though, as we've seen in this video, it's not necessarily historically accurate to call high heels traditionally feminine.
And not wanting to wear heels can have serious repercussions. In December 2015, Nicola Thorpe, a receptionist based in London, was sent home from work without pay after she turned up to work wearing flat shoes as opposed to the 2 to 4 inch heels the temp agency she worked for had mandated. Justifiably furious, she started a parliamentary petition calling for a ban on forcing women to wear heels at work, and it gained over 152,000 signatures. The parliamentary report off the back of the petition found that discriminatory, sexist dress codes that technically should have been banned by the Equality Act of 2010 were still in existence. A BBC article from March 2017 reported that Helen Jones, who at the time chaired the Petitions Committee, said that the inquiry exposed widespread discrimination against women, stereotypical views of what women should look like and dress like and behave like, and shown up outdated attitudes towards women in the workplace. And it's shown that constantly women are belittled when they try to challenge those attitudes.
Despite this, in April 2017, the UK government rejected a petition asking for a new law to ban companies from telling women that they have to wear high heels at work, deciding that the current legislation was adequate, even though companies weren't actually following the legislation, so...
And the flip side of this sexism is the prejudice still facing men who do wear heels. Women shouldn't have to wear heels if they don't want to, and men and people of other genders should be free to wear heels if they do want to, as well as the anti-trans biases trans women and non-binary folk might face when it comes to wearing heels. There are also practical challenges. A lot of shoes designed for women simply aren't made in bigger sizes, which is really sad. I do think that we're moving towards a society where people of all genders are able to wear heels. The last few years have seen a lot more cis men embracing the heels, think Harry Styles on Days. And of course we're seeing non-binary celebrities like Sam Smith and Jonathan Van Ness wearing heels. Every time photos of people who shouldn't be wearing heels circulate, you can find a number of people directing homophobic hatred at them in the comments, as well as misgendering trans women and non-binary. Some people are scared by people who are comfortable ignoring the made-up gender rules about what they should wear, and so just sprout the queerphobic and sexist rhetoric that heels are associated with femininity, and being associated with femininity makes you gay or less than in some way.
Which again is just not historically accurate when it comes to heels. Could we please just stop gendering everything?
Thank you for joining me on this journey through the history of high heels. I'm really enjoying these deep dives into fashion history. Let me know what you'd like to explore with me next. Should I look at the history of pockets and why clothes designed for women often have no or very small pockets next? I'd love it if you'd leave a comment and let me know how you feel about high heels. Do you find that wearing them makes you feel pretty or powerful or both? Are they a fun, affirming form of gender expression for you? Are you a heels lesbian like me? And remember to enter yourself in the giveaway competition to win 1 pair of shoes from my collection with American Duchess. Spoiler, it doesn't have to be the Jessie heels. You can also choose the Claude flats by finding this post on my Instagram at JessicaOutofTheCloset. You need to be subscribed to me on Instagram and following both American Duchess and I on Instagram to be in with a chance of winning. Good luck! I can't wait to see you wearing the shoes very soon. And of course, thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Go to surfshark.com/Jessica for 4 extra months of Surfshark for free, or scan the QR code on screen right here. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye-bye!